This is awesome.
Awesome.
Thanks for having
Hey,
me.
good luck with things. Exciting launch with the intentional man. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
I'm curious, Dave and Christian. Sarah, did you have any questions for Christian? We can.
Yeah, Sarah, any
What came up?
questions that came up you want to ask?
Um, I was curious about, you brought up emotional maturity earlier.
Sure.
Can you
Yeah.
kind of dig into that a little bit more? If you're with someone you think maybe could use some emotional maturity development, how do you mention that to them, or how do they go about it?
Yeah, I guess I would start with how one defines emotional maturity. I think perhaps I think there's a lot of which basically I'd say that I was a very emotionally immature individual. I think there's just natural emotional maturity that as we grow up in the basis of experiences that whether it's a forcing function of sorts that basically tell us, hey, we need to grow up. The latter, which is prior experiences defined by, I always refer to attachment, is emotional maturity. I think it implies more in the context of things that I had deficiency things as a kid. When you think about the core emotional development for children up until about 7 or 8 years old, where the amygdala is fully formed, that defines experiences in the context of relation to adaptations based on how they interacted with their parents. And so I think a lot of the types of emotional maturity that we experience is just what was modeled to us. And so whatever was modeled is really what we internalize. And I take that to heart as a father today, because my kids, as you know, and if you guys have kids, they're constantly looking at you, and they're looking more at what you do more than you say. Right. And what you do is am I situating myself in the context of relationship with their mother, my wife, that, yeah, we have conflicts. We're not avoiding conflicts. We're insinuating, modeling how we repair. And am I tuning to my child so that they're also internalizing and adapting to their own emotional experiences in the context of how they fit into this whole dynamic. They're just not internalizing things just from an implicit standpoint, but they're having explicit experiences in terms of, bi-directional communication between their interactions with their father. But if I'm modeling that which I can repair, in I imply emotional maturity is development at its core based on very specific levels. Foundational core for me is empathy, our capacity for empathy, but that empathy can always be tarnished, because if you are always a pleaser and you're always proximity seeking, then that, which implies being an empath, is you're really sensitive to people's negative emotional energy or experiences. And so you tend to adapt, you want to fix it, or you want to just cling, you want to cling to it. Because then that extenuates in our capacity for compassion, right? And I think you go from empathy and then you go to compassion. It's how we express how care for the empathy that we have for other people. But can you be compassionate with people and maintain healthy boundaries with people? Can you be compassionate and you don't necessarily have to maintain that relationship? Because it all depends on the level of social equity we're trying to maintain in the context with person on a case-by-case basis. And so you have empathy and compassion. And it's just a lot of people just haven't really think about it as much. And why am I, or at least what am I inclined to in the context of my capacity for emotional understanding of myself when I'm not only interpersonally, because I think about the greater extent of emotional maturity is that person's foreknowledge of their emotional experience to themselves. So we talked about this interpersonal component, and I use the top of the emotional maturity model is the lesser to the greater is empathy, compassion, and the greater is something I call equanimity. Is, can I maintain internal emotional self-regulation in my body and my nervous system, my mind, body, and spirit relative to forces that are outside of my control? Can I maintain emotional emotional self-regulation? Because if I have equanimity, then I can encounter those very forces and have a little bit more emotional elasticity in the context of how I engage with people without puffing up nor shrinking back. I'm just able to adapt and fill my space, and be conscious and mindful of myself. Because I say this often, you cannot in couples therapy or even not to myself, you can only attune to people as well as you attune to yourself. So if I define emotional maturity, it's one's ability to first, the greatest level is their emotional understanding of themselves. And I would say they're even the capacity for empathy and compassion internally, because it's just like my relationship to self-love and my relationship to self-compassion really is that driving emotion in the context of my capacity to connect emotionally well with others. So,
Wow.
Beautiful.
Well,
yeah.
you've given us an hour of your time.
You're so generous.
Christian.
Yeah. Thank you, Christian.
Very thankful. Thanks for joining us today. Hey, do us a favor and take a second to subscribe to our podcast and the Utah Marriage Commission YouTube channel at Utah Marriage Commission, where you can watch this and every episode of the show. Be sure to smash the like button, leave a comment, and share this episode with a friend. You can also follow and interact with us on Instagram at Stronger Marriage Life and Facebook at Stronger Marriage. So be sure to share with us which topics you loved or which guests we should have on the show next. If you want even more resources to improve your marriage or relationship connection, visit strongermarriage.org, where you'll find free workshops, e-courses, in-depth webinars, relationship surveys, and more. Each episode of Stronger Marriage Connection is hosted and sponsored by the Utah Marriage Commission at Utah State University. And finally, a big thanks to our producer, Rex Polanis, and the team at Utah State University, and you, our audience. You make this show possible. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the Utah Marriage Commission.